Hey, welcome to Her Sex Podcast. I'm Dr. Leslie Wakefield. I'm a pelvic health physical therapist, and this is Her Sex. I'm talking today with Tabitha Sweeney. She is a coach that specializes in radical self-acceptance, but specifically in the context of sexuality, which already I'm super interested, super intrigued. Please tell me what that means.
Yes. Leslie, first, thank you so much for having me here. And when I talk about radical self-acceptance and sexuality, it's this idea that there's so much taboo, especially for women, to talk about fantasy and desire or initiating or just wanting sex in general. And what I really want to do is let women know that it's okay, that we are also sexual beings and it's supposed to be pleasurable and fun and you should want it. So that's really my goal, is to just open up, take the lid off of everything taboo and put it on the table.
That's kind of scary. I mean, probably for most people to even think about, because there's a reason things are taboo, and honestly, that's kind of what makes them exciting too, is the fact that they are taboo. So I definitely have some particular questions, but would you mind just telling us a little bit about how you got into this? Because that's a rather specialized, outside of the box niche to be working in.
It is. So I've been in the coaching industry for the past 12, 13 years now. And I started in fitness. I started with body image. And I used to actually own a gym. And what happened was, once COVID got here, the gym had to close. And on a personal level, I went through all kinds of personal changes. I got divorced. I had to sell my house. There was all these other things going on. And I had started a brand new healing journey post-divorce, figuring out who I am and what am I looking for. And I was raised very strict Catholic. So this idea of sexuality it came very, very filtered to me. I didn't know I was allowed to enjoy sex. Yes, it was just it all came through that very heavily religious filter, as far as be modest, don't initiate, like that we were basically there for a man's pleasure, right? And to have children. That was pretty much what I knew of sex. And I had plenty of premarital sex in college, but I never allowed myself to actually enjoy it. It was wrapped up in this circle, this vicious cycle of wanting validation and looking to be wanted, but then feeling ashamed because I shouldn't be doing this. And so it was like this vicious cycle. And that was my relationship with sex for the first, until I was 40, for the first very many years of my life, until I was after divorced. And then basically what happened as I was healing, and my best friend is a boudoir photographer, and she said to me, hey, join this website. I'm getting a lot of requests for kink shoots and I need to learn more. And I was like, good best friends don't ask questions. They just do what they're told. So I joined this website. And I was like, my everything, like my brain almost exploded. Like I was like, what? I was literally dropped into the middle of this virtual world of subs and doms and all kinds of kink and all kinds of fetishes and all kinds of things that I was like, this is real? And I just started reaching out to people all across the world and being like, can I ask you questions? And trying to wrap my brain around things. And the more I healed, the more I started realizing that this was a huge piece of who I am. And if I really want to say I'm authentic, if I really want to say I know who I am, I have to go down this road and explore this, because there were things, pre getting into this as my coaching niche and taking that journey, I could never even say the word threesome, let alone I literally, the thought of just saying it would be like, oh my, who would say that? Who would do that? And now I'm like, yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about threesomes. Like, so it's been wild. And I was lucky enough at the very beginning of my journey. I had met a partner who was in the very, very similar situation. Um, and we kind of we clicked, we kind of held hands and jumped and said, let's go exploring. So that was that.
I mean, that's a pretty big jump. That's a pretty big jump from Catholic, I'm going to stereotype it, Catholic
Mm-hmm.
schoolgirl to sort of like shame based validation, like maybe not really enjoying your sex, like not really tuned into yourself, having sex for reasons maybe other than your personal pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
to girl, I'm kinky. And yes, more please. And not only that, I'm going to educate other men and women on this. And I'm interested in your choice of the term radical self acceptance and specifically to do with sexuality, because I think, and that's sort of the goal of the podcast really is, I think most women don't have the opportunity to be exposed to the things that you exposed yourself to, that you were exposed to. And that might be exactly up their alley or exactly not up their alley, but you wouldn't really know unless you had the opportunity to even think about it, to be exposed to it, to make your own decisions and personal opinions about it. And then to your point, how do you really know yourself if you haven't had the opportunity to think through some of those things and either choose yes or choose no?
Yeah. I mean, so to me, radical self acceptance is the space where spirituality, sexuality, and authenticity kind of collide. And it's where you get really, really vulnerable and raw and ugly with yourself about who you are and what you believe. And you peel back all the filters of what you've been told your whole life. And that, in terms of, I had done that on a spiritual level, I was there. On an authenticity level, as far as what I wanted, what my core and my morals and my beliefs were, I was there. But there was this like internal fire that was like, okay, but, and I think I started dating and I started, when you're dating at 40 with kids as a divorced woman, it's very different than dating in your early 20s, right? Like the conversations, everything is different. So and let's face it, there are good guys out there, but a lot of them you're like, oh, I understand now why you're in this dating pool. And so they would come out and they would ask,
At this time.
right? Like they would come out and they would be asking questions and they would be saying things that to me at first I was like, oh, why would you ask me that? Why would you say, like, that's so personal? But then, 2 days later, I was still laying in bed trying to fall asleep thinking about that question and like, why can't I know the answer. I know what my fantasy is. Why can't I verbalize it? Why can't I say it even to a stranger? And if I can't say it, I'm never going to get to experience it. So,
In your personal journey, and of course, I want to talk about your coaching work, but in your personal journey, how important do you think it was to have a partner who was supportive versus do you think it's possible to have this level of radical self-acceptance and experimentation, understanding yourself if you don't have a partner maybe to engage with on some of these things?
I think it is. So, I think it's both. For me, it's funny. So my partner and I actually split earlier this year. And I had a few friends who were like, are you going to keep going? And I was like, yeah, because if I don't, then was it really for me or was it for him? He's always been my safety in all of this. And it's a totally different journey now going alone than it was with him at the beginning. But for me, I found a lot of comfort having a partner who was just as invested in this as I was and super supportive. It was also extremely difficult. There was we had to learn, we were not monogamous. We had to literally learn what that looks like. Like the first time he was going on a date with somebody else. And I'm like, okay, I know you're not breaking any rules, but I have these feelings I was trained to have. So what's really at the bottom of that? And it was wild and extremely healing to go through the entire, like, why am I so jealous? Why am I feeling these things that we agreed you're not doing anything wrong? And it was so freeing. And I won't lie, it was hard. There was a lot of skited feeling involved, right? Like you're super excited and you're super scared. Like, so a lot of I think that's what really, when I really started pushing into this is the coaching I want to do and changed my niche of coaching, it was because there were so many times I was looking for answers and I didn't know where to find them. I didn't have somebody I could go to and say, hey, I know no matter what I say, you're not going to judge me. You know? And so we really figured everything out on our own and we made a lot of mistakes. And my goal is if I can help people avoid some of that pain and some of those mistakes, it would be so
What
much.
were some of the questions you were finding yourself wanting to ask? What are questions that your clients come to you with?
Oh my goodness. Everything and anything from, I mean, when you think about just like going into, you know, the first time, here we go. Our third date was going to a sex club. That I was like, these really exist? Like, I was so naive. I didn't know any of it. And I don't like crowds of people to start with. So I'm like, what am I doing? And I was so nervous. I didn't know what to expect. So it's like those kind of things like, well, what can I expect? What am I going to have to let people engage with me? Like, what am I going to see? How do I dress? Do I take a purse? Like I had stupid questions like that too. Like, where do I put my things when I get there? You know, questions about like, you're going into this group setting or a threesome setting and like, how does that even get started? Like, how does that even happen? You know, those are the kinds of questions I feel like I had so many of them. How do I protect myself? What do I need to know? What questions do I need to ask before I, meet up with somebody?
What do you think are with your coaching work now, let's say, on the other side of this, what are some of the most common, I suppose the idea of a kink is that it's not common, but what are some of the most common kinks and what we would consider outside of the box, outside of the norm, sexual fantasies or interests that you find women in particular coming to you with wanting to explore, but maybe not knowing how to?
I think the one thing a lot of women that we a lot of times are discussing, I don't even know, is it a kink or not, but simply just initiating sex. Because what I have found is a lot of women don't know how to initiate sex. And I was one of them for a really long time. And I remember like getting so frustrated over it. And the other thing I would
Explain what you mean.
sure.
Because in my mind's like initiate sex to be like, hey, do you want to have sex?
Right. Okay. So essentially, right? Like that's all you have to do for a guy. Like my partner at one point was like, all you have to do is unzip my pants and I can read a social cue. And I was like,
I can read a social cue.
what? Like to me, like if you yelled across the room, like, hey, you want to have sex? No, I'm busy right now. Like, how are you not? Aren't you working? Don't you have something to do? Like I want to be like, have my shoulders rubbed or, I want that little bit of like foreplay that gets me kind of going. And I remember attempting to do that to him. And then he was snoring. And I was like, you just fell asleep on me? And he's like, what are you so mad about? And I was like, because he's like, you were going for sex? He's like, no, I thought you were just being nice. Like, he's like, that's not. And I started realizing that, like, the way he would approach me to turn me on and say, like, hey, I'm in the mood, is not how he wanted to be approached. So the thoughts of literally just being like, hey, you want to do it? You ready to go? Never occurred to me. And then when you add on top of that, the fact that you add that Catholic religious upbringing, where in my entire life, I never said it was, I wanted it. I never reached out. I never initiated. I never started anything. It was really, like, again, mind blowing when I was like, all I have to do is say it. He's like, yeah, that's it. Like,
You were really conditioned, whether through upbringing or personal experience later, to be more of a passive recipient, looking for not proposal, but
I always,
proposition.
yes,
What's my word?
like, I always waited I was responsive as opposed to proactive, always. And I've talked to so many women in the same boat.
I didn't mean to catch up, but it's so interesting because responsive sexual desire is a really big topic now. And I think we find ourselves wanting to and needing to normalize that as being like a very normal state for many women, which is responding more versus having more of a spontaneous style of sexual desire arousal. And what you're describing is having that spontaneous desire arousal, but then feeling conditioned to not be able to express it or pursue it, which is so interesting because it's exactly the other side of what I think a lot of us are talking about right now.
Which for me I would get these insane bursts of anger almost. Like, I would be so angry because here I was thinking I was being super clear, and with my goal of, like, getting you to, like, come on to me, because I would never just come on to you. And I would get so angry when it didn't work. And then, he would fall asleep and I would be like, really? Seriously? Okay. Like, and then, he woke up to, like, crazy. Let's face it. He woke up to crazy because I would be so angry over it. And it took me a really long time before I realized that that's exactly what it was. I wanted to pursue, but I didn't know how. I only knew how to react.
And that would be pretty difficult then, let's say, to bring up a sexual desire or a fantasy or something that you might consider outside of the box to a partner. If you don't even have a way to initiate to start. How do you introduce something new? How are you proactive if you're already uncomfortable to initiate in the first place?
Yeah.
So then in terms of your coaching, if you're working with people who are trying to find this like internal authentic, like, what do I really want, and then how do I go about accepting that in myself, you're working through like a double layer there of first know yourself, and then second be confident and empowered to pursue what you want.
Yes. And I think for me, I found that easier to heal and walk through with a partner who I had extreme trust with, and we were extremely open and very communicative with. I can think of other partners I've had in the past where that would not have been the case. I would never have felt safe enough to ever open up and start those discussions. And I think that's a lot of times when I'm working with couples or I'm working with, we're always talking about the idea of safety. of emotional safety. Does the person feel safe enough to say whatever is on their heart, whatever it is that they need to get out, without fear that there's going to be repercussions or anger or some other volatile stance that goes on?
Do you ever work with couples or do you work with individuals who are in partnership?
I do both. I love working with couples because I love watching those moments where you recognize that the other person understands. Like, it's been a miscommunication for, 5, 10, 15 years. And it had nothing to do with whether or not they love you or whether or not they agree with you. It is simply just a miscommunication that they didn't know that's how you were feeling or what you were thinking. They're interpreting. So for instance, like somebody like me who wants to be spontaneous and doesn't know how, your partner is interpreting that as they never want me. And that couldn't be farther from the truth, because I'm over here going, I want spontaneous sex right now. Why don't you want me right now? How do I make you want me? And it was like this, like, I don't want to say trickery, but I only knew how to react. So what could I do to get him to come on to me, as opposed to me just like reaching out? And I remember when we figured that out, and it was like both of us, he was like, this whole time, that's what's been going on.
So then, as you started to explore some of it sounds like for you, even just initiating was outside of the box, but you went way further than that.
I did.
So when it came to exploring some of these other things, it really sounds like, I don't want to make assumptions, but it sounds like you really moved pretty far, like your barometer for what was normal, let's say in your marriages or in college, to like where you are now. That's a huge swing. And if just figuring out how to initiate was a big deal, how on earth did you find yourself at sex clubs and like dungeons
And
like, all this other stuff?
And to be totally honest, figuring out the whole initiation thing, that was one of the last things we figured out. So like, we did everything else first. I think there was a freedom that we had jumped in, and it was like, we are just going to try things. And there was this, we were very communicative, and we were very much like, consent matters. And at any given time, we can say stop, we can pull the plug, we can say, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, we had that trust in each other that we would do that. But yeah, one of my biggest fantasies that I had only ever seen like in, 50 Shades of Grey, was being in a dungeon, like being chained on a cross or on the wall. And he actually had found a couple that would do that to me on our fourth date. And I'd like to say, like, when I say like, this is our third date or our fourth date, we were living 4 hours apart. So there were several weeks of talking and a whole lot more trust being built up. And then our dates were like weekends meeting up in different cities. So it wasn't
like wild
weekends. So it wasn't like, okay, I've met him a week ago and this is our third date. Like, this is, several weeks in to getting to know each other and the trust that was built. But he had found a couple who they put me on the wall, and I didn't know what to expect. I was super nervous and super excited, and there were people watching, and it was hands down every single thing I thought every single thing I dreamed it to be. It absolutely was. It was amazing. And it was wild to me to be able to communicate that to somebody who then was like, okay, well, let's figure out how to make this happen. And, the deeper you get into just talking to people, like, you start realizing that there's an entire underground community of professionals, like lawyers and doctors and accountants and all of these people who have real jobs and real families and real houses in suburbia, who also enjoy the things that you like. It doesn't make you this like one-eyed freak,
Some degenerate like creeping around in a vampire movie.
Yes. Yeah, because that's kind of how it makes you feel at first. Like, who's going to be like, what can I expect? Or is this weird? I think that's the one thing. Like, everybody wants to know, is their kink weird? And my answer is always like, as long as it's not,
You see,
as long as it's legal, I don't personally, in my definition of kink, if it's illegal, it's not a kink. That goes into a whole nother ballpark. So like, as long as you can't get arrested,
go do you.
Right. I mean, there's been a couple conversations I've had with people where I've been like, okay, I'm going to be honest. She might not agree to this. Like, because I wouldn't agree to this.
I love that you want this for yourself,
but we might also have to have a conversation about her allowing you. And I think that's a really important piece of all of this, is the conversations that come into, if my partner isn't on board or won't be on board with this, then what options do I have? And there are options, because I have met so many people and so many couples in fully committed relationships, but they might have somebody who they meet with once a month to take care of their kink. And kink does not always mean sex and penetration. Like, kink can literally just be, I like being spanked, or I like being put on a wall and flogged. Like, there was no penetration in that, right? Like, that was mind-blowing to me when I realized that kink and sex weren't.
It's interesting you say that, because earlier in the year I did an interview with a woman who identifies as asexual. She doesn't experience sexual attraction, sexual desire in the way that we normally consider, like the kind of heteronormative or even homonormative, like straight line A to B desire, arousal, and activity. And she doesn't experience it that way, but she was talking about within the asexuality community that there is a kink and BDSM community. And because sex doesn't necessarily have to go with some of these other desires, some of these other desires fill a lot of needs within our life and our subconscious, and it's not always about sexuality. So if you could speak to that a little bit more, I think that'd be something interesting to fill in gaps on.
Yeah, that was absolutely enlightening for me when I learned that. And I the first time I learned it, I went to dinner. I met this girl. I don't even know where I met her. And she was just so openly talking about things. And I was like, can I take you to dinner and pick your brain? Like, will you just tell me things? And she was explaining to me that she has kink partners and she has intimacy partners, and how they don't overlap. And I was like, wait, what? And so she was breaking it down, and it's hard because for me, it does very much overlap. It does very much what I desire. I feel like I would feel incomplete if it was with a partner who it didn't end in, or sex was not a part of. But she was basically saying how, she would go to the club and be flogged or something like that and be watched. And that was the kink, was just being watched. And then it gave her that same release that sex gives us.
Satisfaction.
Yes. satisfaction is a perfect word for it. And it was really interesting as I got into the community more to realize that's a very common thing. That I did so much studying in the dom sub relationships because I just couldn't wrap my brain around it. The number of doms I interviewed and the things I learned and how they are all completely different. And at one point I was like, I think I'm a sub. I thought I was a sub because I didn't know how to initiate. So I thought I must be a sub.
Ah.
And after like, a couple interviews, I was like, I don't think I'm a sub. Okay. Because a lot of those dom sub relationships are not even sexual. It's this entire power dynamic in their relationship. And it's not something I completely understand because it is something that to me, I respect it. I understand people wanting it, but personally, I'm like, I'm not going to listen to you. Like, that's really cute that you think. And I have no desire.
You're so cute. You can't tell me what to do.
That's really cute. Let me tell you, I'll just lie to you and tell you I did what you wanted me to do. I'm never going to actually do it. This isn't going to work.
Worst sub ever.
Yeah, I learned that. But it was that realization that this goes beyond the bedroom. And I was like, oh, okay. So they dictate. And for instance, there was one guy I went out with and he was, or no, I didn't go out with him. I was interviewing him and he was local to me at the time. And he was looking for a new sub. And I was like, maybe. And I was like, but I'm not going to be like, I'm not looking for a monogamous commitment. And he's like, yeah, that's okay. You don't have to be monogamous as long as I approve who you're with. And I was like, no, that's not going to work for me.
It's so interesting. When you first were getting started, you're like, I must be a sub because I don't initiate. I'm comfortable initiating. So therefore I must. And that was, in retrospect, a lack of understanding of yourself and acceptance of yourself and your own desires, but then also truly just not really knowing what that meant. And we have these ideas because we watched 50 Shades and we read a couple romance novels, but there's so much more than what your initial impression was, even as you went down the journey of getting to know yourself and the options available to you.
Yes. And I mean, I just thought because I wanted to be chained to a wall, that must mean I'm a sub. And
okay, but clarify. So that didn't mean you wanted to be a sub.
It didn't.
You just wanted to be
so
chained to a wall.
There is also terminology called top or bottom in the community. And so like I will describe myself as a bottom unless I'm with somebody who I'm really
but not a
sub. So I'm a bottom, meaning it's this scene, it's this scenario, it's this interaction. I give up my control and I say go for it. But there's a start and an end date, or start and end time to it. It's not we are not getting into any sort of relationship or dynamic that will carry outside of this 40 minutes, half an hour, whatever it may be.
Got it.
Yes. Which was also...
It's for the act itself, but not an ongoing relationship dynamic.
Yes. So when we would go to the club and I would want to be put on the wall, that's me saying I want to be a bottom right now. I'll bottom. But, and like the couple who flogged me that very first time, they are only tops. Like they will never, like she's like, I will never be put on the wall. Oh, absolutely not. And I was like, okay, I see that. Cause I have zero desire to ever like hold the flogger, and I don't want to do that. Like,
yeah,
that's not my jam. But it was very set that like, so we knew it's almost like, your role in that act or in that play or whatever you're going to call it.
You called it a scene, which seems really appropriate because it is quite staged. And you had to know that you wanted this particular setup. You had to plan how to make that particular setup happen and where to do it and who was going to do it with you. I imagine that took planning and location and discussing with your partner. I mean, we say a scene, like I love that word for that because it sounds like you really had to plan and then enact this particular fantasy that you had. Um,
Yes.
and I guess you need a space to do that. That's kind of cool that that
It
exists.
there's a lot of terminology that I realized, things like the word scene or play. Um, because the one thing about this community that I realized is, people kind of are like, oh, it's just all kinds of horny people together. And the reality is, before you ever enter into a room with somebody, you're having this entire conversation. What do I want? What do you want? What are our hard boundaries? Where does consent lie? Where is in conversations that I've never had before I started this journey. And that was eye opening to me.
Which is funny because everyone thinks that the BDSM community and all of the, you hear dungeon, like, ooh,
Yeah.
my. Um, all these different places and people and things seem so counterculture and wild and scary and dark. But way you're describing it, it might be the most managed, pre-planned, consent obtained and reobtained, like uh, activity sexually that you'd ever done in your life compared to your previous relationships and college exploits.
Hands down.
I mean, maybe the safest thing sexually you've ever done, physically and emotionally.
Hands down. And I feel like when you meet the people there's two types of people in the community. And there's the people who have found out who they are. They've gone through the work, the healing. There is such a level of respect. And it's a very, you do you, right? Like, so even if that's not something that turns me on, like, I'm not going to judge it because we've all got our own things. And there's also the people who are in the middle of broken and not really trying to do the work. They're just looking for the validation. And what happens is they come in, and I think they quickly realize that it's not the fit. So it's almost like there's a divide of like this side of people and that side of people, and they don't really overlap, because going in as somebody who's healed and in a healthy relationship where we communicate and we have no secrets, and then you meet a couple who was like, well, we're going to save our marriage because somebody cheated, so we're going to get into this and come here, and you're like, that sounds like drama, that sounds like issues, or like that. Yeah, like that sounds like nope, that's not for us. Or you meet somebody who is like, you'll start talking, and in the way that they're talking to you, I'm like, you don't give me good feels. Like, I don't trust that you would stop if I said stop. Or
Wow.
but, and I'll say that's far and few between, but there are definitely people who want the power and think this is a community of easy targets.
So how do you protect yourself from someone like that if you're going in with sort of the hope and expectation that everyone's in it for the right reasons, the way, you are, let's say, but then you have kind of lurkers, as you're describing, that might not be a good choice. How do you differentiate that?
You always trust your gut. So the biggest worst situation we ever got ourselves into, and I think you go in with the understanding that there is going to be mishaps and potentially rough situations, and we got ourselves into one. In the second we walked in the door, everything in me was like, nope, 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 nope. But we were still pretty new, and I didn't have the courage yet to speak up and to say, no, you know what, we're going to go. And after you put yourself in a situation like that once, Like there was never another time where I wasn't like, yep, nope, that little internal thing went off and it's telling you like just turn around and go. You don't have to do anything.
Is that part of that radical self-acceptance, theme that you bring to your work, which is, all right, my gut is saying XYZ and I accept that and I'm not going to make excuses for that, and I'm sorry if this makes you feel a certain way, but I'm going to say my no, and here's my boundary. And also is part of the journey of radical self-acceptance, which is not just like, ooh, here are all the fun things that I want to go do, but also here's all the things I don't want to do. I have no interest in doing. I don't have to explain that necessarily to anyone. I'm going to go with my gut.
100%. We do so much self-worth and boundary work in my coaching because let's face it, especially as women, most of us didn't grow up learning how to instill boundaries. And especially if you grew up in an uber religious family, right? Like it's smile, be polite, don't make anyone else uncomfortable. And so we learned how to be uncomfortable for the sake of everyone else. And I think that's something that our generations now we're really working to correct with the younger generations. But there's so much work to do on that. And I remember when I finally called it early. Like I should have called it way before, but I did. I excused myself at one point. I went to the bathroom.
Do you mind sharing what was, you don't have to go into a lot of, gory detail, but just to give us some context, you had a bad feeling and you ended up being right, but what was in general the situation that you wish in retrospect you hadn't put yourself in?
So we had gone over to a house for a couple swap. And
which is a couple swap.
So that is basically, exactly as it sounds. And, we had been talking with this couple for a couple weeks. It was our first time actually getting together. We skipped the part of going out for drinks first, which is what we always do. And we never skipped it again because like the second that we walked in, it was just that vibe was off. And you know how there's some people that you just meet them and you're like, we are not going to actually click. Like he was extremely possessive and demeaning, and humiliation and degradation is one of my hard limits. Like that's like a hard no for me. And he was just extremely, I hate even saying he was extremely dumb because he wasn't a healthy, respectable dom, right? Like he was very dominating, and
that he wasn't respecting your boundary, which means that he wouldn't have been a good dom
right
to start with.
Exactly. And so basically when you think of that person, you think of the power hungry white male who just wants what he wants. And his wife was adorable and she was so sweet. And I'm like, she would be so great, except for I wonder what's wrong because she's with him. And from that very first moment, like he just gave me the creeps. And I don't get the creeps a lot, but things kind of got started. And he had said a few things. And at one point, I crawled up on my partner's lap and I said, I don't like him. I want to go home. But we didn't, at that point, we didn't have a safe word. We didn't have a communication. And there was definitely a miscommunication at that point. And things kind of kept going. And until I finally got up and I excused myself and I went to the bathroom and kind of composed myself. And I came out, thank God for smartwatches. And I was like, we got to go. The babysitter called. Like, that's it. And I might have kicked my partner really, really hard as I was walking by him because he didn't pick up on any of my like, subconscious hints. But basically the guy, he was bringing out toys. There was no asking consent. And it was unlike anything we'd ever experienced before. And my partner, when we got in the truck, he's like, what was going on? Like, what was up with you? And I'm like, what was up with me? He didn't realize. He's like, Tab, I didn't realize how you were actually feeling. He's like, because you said the words, but then there was this smile on your face. He's like, and you looked calm and you looked relaxed. And I realized at that point, as women, we've been trained to, that's what we've been trained. And how many times have we been in situations where it's easier to say yes than to say no, because you know that they're bigger than you. They know that they can overpower you. And if I'm nice and I smile and I just go with it, it will be easier and I'll get out less scathed. And he genuinely, I mean, we got in the truck and I just started bawling, and he's like, I had no idea like that's how you were genuinely feeling inside. He's like, I thought it was like just a minor thing. And then he felt so bad because he felt like he didn't protect me. And then we came up with new safety.
Thank God you left when you did.
Yes.
But isn't it incredible that like you've come on at that moment, I'm sure you felt like you had been on this great journey, you had overcome so many personal hangups and you were exploring, and yet that training from, the Catholic schoolgirl, which I mean, unfortunately we all get a piece of that, religion or not, in our culture, um it still kicked in. It still snuck up on you. Even in that situation, there was still more learning of yourself and confidence in yourself and acceptance of yourself to be had. Even in the midst of like a couple swap, which from the outside to so many other people looks like, whoa, this girl's got it all figured out. She is as like out there and wild as you can get.
Yeah. And it was those things where he looked at me and he's like, wait, the moment we walked into the house, and he's like, why did we stay then? And it was like, I don't know. Cause I didn't know how to say, I don't want to do this in a setting where it wasn't like a club, like, oh, we're going to go get a drink. We'll be right back. And then you don't go back, or you can kind of get away. Like, we'd never been in this intimate of a setting before and needed to.
I don't want to hurt their feelings.
Yes.
I don't want to offend them. We set this whole thing up. We're already here now. Maybe I'm just being a little crazy.
And isn't that what we do as women? Like, it's always like we take the blame. Like, well, what did he do? Like, if it was really bad, wouldn't you have felt it? And I mean, and that was really eye-opening, and it really forced us to work on holding our boundaries in terms of like, this is we don't feel good. We don't do something. And it was that reminder of, we never want to put somebody else in that situation. So we started even more so working with consent, even between us. Like, there were times he would say something and I'm like, but and he's like, no. I want a yes or a no. Don't tell me. And I'm like, okay, because that's right. Because consent is only a yes. Consent is not the absence of a no, which is something, again, that we forget.
I know that when we did our sort of pre-interview and I was getting to know you and your work, I asked you a question, and I'm gonna find it and read it now, because you said something that really brought it into my mind. Of course, I'm saying that now.
I'm like, I hope I can remember what I said.
No, because you just answered it. Here it is. What does a woman's sexuality have to do with the rest of her life, if anything? And everything that I'm hearing you talk about, I mean, it would be so easy to frame this story as like, well, I discovered myself and now I coach because I've got it all figured out. And you're actually describing using exploration of your sexuality as a way to understand yourself better and grow within yourself even now as you explore this whole, what looks like from the outside, like kind of crazy counterculture, like, oh, she must have it all figured out if she's in that. But you're actually learning about yourself as you explore your sexuality and the aspects of that, and partnership and consent and trusting your gut and self-acceptance and all these other aspects. So I'll ask you, how does women's sexuality affect the rest of her life?
I think it affects it in every way. I think in every way, it allows you to, if you can own your sexuality, if you can own your fantasy and your desire and who you are and what you want, and not be riddled with guilt and shame, you have to, in order to really get those things, in order to really get the satisfaction out of those things, you have to level every other part of your life up. Like, otherwise, you're in a very dangerous community, in a very dangerous space, right? Because you have to have boundaries. You have to know your worth. You have to be ready to face the ugly parts of you. There's no way you can enter into this lifestyle, especially with a partner who you adore, respect, and love, and not experience jealousy and not experience things. And the thing about this lifestyle is that it forces those conversations. And in forcing those conversations, we are leveling up every sense of who we are, because the more you know, the better you can be. You know, once you know better, you have to do better. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's essentially what it is. I mean, and the root of where this coaching really took me and this exploration really took me, that was completely a surprise to me, was I didn't realize the personal up level it was going to give me, the way it was going to up my vibrations, the way it was a full catalyst into who I am as a human being, when I would look at my partner and be thinking in my head, okay, I'm really jealous right now. Why am I really jealous? Like, how do I work through this, as opposed to old school monogamous jealousy that I had experienced in the past that ended with a fight, right? Like, I don't want this to be a fight. I respect you. I love you. This is exactly what we've agreed upon. And if you're not comfortable in your own, like, we realized at the beginning, my jealousy at the beginning, I would get so crazy jealous if he tried any sort of exploration with somebody else that was, like, not missionary in a bed. And he's like, why? And I'm like, because I don't want to be left out. Like,
Well,
but what it came down to was the fact that there's a difference between male and female. He's the person in power. He doesn't go into a situation on guard the way I go into a situation. I would never go into a situation with somebody who I'm meeting for a random night and say, here, tie me up. Like, no. But there are a lot of women who will do that and who did do that. So he was getting to do that with other people, but I wouldn't put myself in that situation. Well, isn't that a whole different layer of jealousy now? Like, hold up. We're getting to some ugly truths about me right now that I have to look at and face in order to level up. And so I feel there is a strength and there is a power in a confident type of way, not in a domineering type of way, but in a, I know who I am and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with what I like. And I'm not here to impress anyone else. That comes the deeper you start exploring your sexuality and all of those pieces that are attached with it.
can I ask a question? And I don't mean to come across as a
Yeah.
challenge, but if a question pops into my head, and now I'm not the only one
Yeah.
wondering, we spend all this time talking about boundaries and trust your gut. And if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. And you don't have to explain why it doesn't feel right. But then you just hit me with, I felt crazy jealous and I didn't stop it. So, what's the difference between this doesn't feel good, I don't like it, I'm going to stop, I don't have to make excuses to anyone, versus this doesn't feel good, I'm really jealous and I'm uncomfortable, but I'm going to let it continue and also figure out myself and change something about myself in order to accept that?
That's a great question, because I think they come from, for me, they come from different parts of my body. And I think this is where that spiritual connection, and I don't mean, religion or God necessarily, but it could be the universe. It could be this idea that there's something bigger that's looking out for us. When I get that feeling in my gut that something's, I can't put my finger on it, but it's like everything just went up and it's like high alert. Like, okay, be on the look. Like it's a different sense and it's a different feeling. It's much deeper than the feeling of, and this is where we have to get to those ugly truths about ourselves. The crazy jealousy is surface level. I'm angry and I can feel my hands like bunching up and I can feel it like this. But if I actually stop and breathe for a second and say, why am I so angry? I'm angry because I'm uncomfortable. I'm angry because it's not me. But he didn't break any rules. So there's some things we need to work out. We need to process. I need to dig deeper into. But there's no red high alert, right? Like I'm trying to think of the best way to explain that. Because I don't know if what I said just makes sense or not.
I mean, I'm going to say back what I heard and then tidy it up. It sounds like you're just going with your gut. It sounds like for you, maybe not for every person in that situation, but for you, the crazy jealousy is not hitting that gut level stop. It's reminding you of something else you used to feel, and you know that it's not actually you. It's just something I don't want to make up stories. Something you were programmed with in a previous relationship. I don't know. But for you, what you're saying is just for you, it's a different gut feeling, and that it still comes down to you trusting your gut, whether it's this doesn't feel right, we're leaving right now, or I'm uncomfortable, but this isn't about the situation. This is something that's on me.
Yes.
But both of them is you trusting your gut. And so for anyone else listening, they need to trust their gut. What was right for you in that scenario might not be right for someone else. Just because you decided to work through your jealousy as you've kind of fine-tuned it within yourself to be, that doesn't mean that situation, if somebody else is put in that situation, they don't feel good the way you didn't feel good, but maybe for them it's a hard stop.
100%. And I think the thing that we have to realize, and this is where when I say spirituality, so much of it, I'm talking about trusting ourselves. I'm talking about trusting ourselves when I say spirituality. So that to me is like, again, it's something we've taken away from little girls. We've numbed them to those feelings of something is wrong. Be aware. And how many stories I've listened to of women getting hurt, raped, whatever the case may be. And they were like, well, I just was trying to be polite. Right. And so one of the biggest steps is really, if you get really quiet and you really start getting in tune with your body and with what you want, you can start connecting to those feelings that will guide you correctly. And I will say a lot of times you mess it up and then you have to figure it out later, right? Like,
and it must be so challenging because it's my impression that, kink and taboo, well, it's exciting because it is kind of uncomfortable. That's part of the appeal that makes it so enticing and exciting and something that people want to pursue, but it's inherently, for many people, kind of uncomfortable. And maybe that's part of the excitement. So,
and I think that it's important to say, like, when I say, like, you listen to your gut, like, I'm listening for those danger signs. So there's uncomfortable. There's like, I haven't done this before. Like, what's going to happen? But am I safe? Am I in a space that is safe? Do I trust? Like,
So as a coach, if you had a client that was like, I don't know how to tell the difference, I'm so out of touch, like how, all right, listen to my body, where am I going to feel that in my body? Is there any activities or exercises that you recommend to people to help them tune into that?
I think it starts with, I recommend them almost having a conversation with themselves daily. Take 5 minutes, take 3 minutes. If 5 minutes can feel like forever to sit in silence and talk to yourself, right? For me, it was always easier if I was writing. So I would kind of recap and get a journal and just let your pen flow.
In particular,
Ask yourself the questions of, what do I really want? Or think about, start putting thoughts to the past, because you've had these feelings. You may have ignored them, but think about a time where you were like, oh, that I should have seen that coming. Or, oh, I did see that coming. I can think of the number of times, think about the number of times you've had somebody calls you or the boss calls you into the office and you're not surprised, right? Like, you're like, I knew this was coming. That's that intuition. I think that, the reality is that there's so many things I wish we could know at 20 that we don't know or start learning until we're in our late 30s or 40s. And so much of that has to do with experience. That, if somebody had told you these things, I'm sure actually a lot of people did tell us these things, but we didn't have any experience to put to it. And the more experience that we have and the deeper the drive to figure out who we are, that's what takes us down our journey of radical self-acceptance. And that's what takes us and leads us to calling in the people and the partners and the life that we want, because we only get one. So we should really, isn't it our job to do everything we can to experience it in the most amazing way? That's what I want.
so we mentioned it on the gap, but I feel like there's more questions than answers. You have so much, not just personal experience, but then also your experience with your clients. And I would love to have you come back on because I have a whole list of questions that I've written in my head for you. Maybe we'll do a round 2 of this interview. And in the meantime, I'm going to put all of your links and all your contacts and everything in the show notes so that if somebody wants to follow you to get more information or work with you, they can reach out to you directly.
Absolutely. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for having me. And I'd love to be back on the show.
All right. Thank you so much. We will definitely do that.